former President Trump is in court to testify in his New York civil fraud trial.
Okay, Fox 5 legal analyst Wendy Patrick joining us now once again. Everybody's just waiting to see what he's going to say on the stand as opposed to what he keeps saying outside of the courtroom.
Right, so he has a different seat in court today. I'll call it the hot seat. He's actually going to take the stand and testify, which is one of the reasons so many people are going to be watching. But do we really think he's going to say something different than what he's been saying publicly all along? Remember that according to the former president, his assets are probably worth even more than they were valued. That's what he's been saying publicly. That's, by the way, along the same lines of what he said in his deposition. In this same case, remember the first time before it was charged, he pled the fifth 450 times. But then once it was charged, he did testify and made some of those great statements about, gosh, you know, it's probably worth even more than that. So it's not a surprise what he's going to say. It's also not a surprise what the judge may think about what he says. Remember, this is not a jury trial. It's a jury of one. The judge sitting on the bench that already found him to be not credible and fined him when he testified just briefly last week.
So you think exactly what we expect is going to happen today? There won't be anything new?
Here's what I think might be new. He has to stay in his lane. So less is more. If I were his lawyer, that's what I would say. Mr. Trump, less is more. He's going to have to answer the questions and just the questions and not make it like a campaign rally where he veers off and says all types of things.
Is he capable of doing that?
Well, we'll see. I believe that he is because he's been deposed before and he's testified before. But the stakes, Shelley, have never been this high because think about this. If he were to go off the rails, go out of his lane and say whatever, it could be used against him in his criminal cases because he don't have that kind of protection. He's a witness in court, so he has to be very careful what he says. Now, conversely, if he were to take the fifth, I don't expect that's what he's going to do, but that would also be different in a civil context because a judge could conclude that's an adverse inference. In other words, you could read something negative into his refusal to testify, unlike what you would be able to do in a criminal court.
So last week, Don Jr. and Eric Trump testified. I wanted to ask you why they were called to testify, but it seems pretty obvious. But for me, is it believable that they could say something like, well, we just signed the papers because we pay the accountants and we pay all the other lawyers to fill out forms and I just sign it? That seems like I mean, you know, I don't know how to run a multi-billion-dollar business, but if you pay people enough and say, okay, sign here, okay, I trust you. There's a certain trust element. Was that believable?
You know what's interesting about that? If this were a jury trial, what I would say is I guarantee there's people on the jury that would think to themselves, I do the same thing when my accountant puts something in front of me. I trust. That's why I pay my accountant. They would probably say the same thing if they had a lawyer or anybody else that's doing business for them. Yeah. Here's the difference. Yeah. You've got the two Trump sons who presumably are more invested in the, let's call it the infrastructure of the business, how it works, what it's worth, what the numbers mean. We know that because not only of the titles that they held, but because of other things they've talked about in the past regarding their involvement. Even so, this judge would have to believe that they, just like the accountants, knew the inner workings to the extent that they knew the evaluations were false. Now, I don't expect the former president's going to say much of anything different in terms of, at least to some extent, being able to rely on the accounting and the other valuation, except that his brand is worth more. You've heard him say that in other trials, in other cases, that it's his brand that lends credibility, value, status, prestige to anything he has his name on. So there's that factor, too, that he has in his favor.
Raul's asking about the sons, but what about his daughter Ivanka? When are we going to hear from her?
We're supposedly going to hear from her on Wednesday. And the reason she is going to testify is she was involved in the company within the last 10 years. And, you know, the statute of limitations ran on her. She's not a charged defendant, unlike Trump's two sons. But at least the Attorney General feels she may have something of value to add to the case. Again, jury of one. I keep coming back to that. It's up to this judge, basically, who's already found Trump to be liable. This trial, if we call it that, is about how much. How much do they have to pay? Yeah. And can the president continue to do business?
Why is it a jury of one? Because Trump was complaining that he doesn't have a jury, but wasn't didn't his lawyers argue to not have a jury? Can you clarify that?
I can,
for us?
because a lot of people are asking about that. So this kind of lawsuit is not the type that would afford the right to a jury trial generally. Not that they could not have litigated that issue. I don't know. I think it would have been an uphill battle.
Sure.
And his lawyers were very outspoken about that. They said there wasn't a box to check to say we did or didn't want a jury. So I know he says that, but of course he's not a lawyer. He's a businessman. He went from the business setting to the Situation Room, not the courtroom to the Situation Room. So leave it to the lawyers to explain why they have this judge of one.
Wendy Patrick.
Sure, we'll talk about this again.
Thank goodness you're here. Thanks for the
Thank
time.
you.
Good seeing
Thank you.